The universe is 13.8 billion years old. It contains approximately 2 trillion galaxies. Each galaxy contains, on average, approximately 100 billion stars, and each star has, on average, approximately 1.6 planets orbiting it. The total number of planets in the observable universe is, by this calculation, approximately 300 sextillion, 300,000 billion individual worlds. Each one a potential home for life, each one a potential cradle for consciousness, each one a potential source of the radio signals, the laser beams, the gravitational wave transmissions, and the megastructure engineering projects that an advanced civilization might produce. The numbers are not speculative. They are measured derived from the Kepler Space Telescope's census of exoplanets, which detected over 5,000 confirmed planets and estimated that the average star hosts at least one planet, from the Hubble Space Telescope's Deep Field surveys, which counted the galaxies in a representative patch of sky and extrapolated to the full sky, and from the spectroscopic surveys that have characterized the chemical composition of thousands of stellar atmospheres, confirming that the elements required for life, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, are abundant throughout the universe. The chemistry of life is not rare. The amino acids that constitute the building blocks of proteins have been detected in meteorites, in interstellar gas clouds, and in the tails of comets. The nucleobases that constitute the building blocks of DNA and RNA have been detected in carbonaceous chondrite meteorites, and the simple organic molecules that the prebiotic chemistry requires, formaldehyde, hydrogen cyanide, methanol, are among the most abundant molecules in the interstellar medium. The raw materials for life are everywhere. The conditions for life, liquid water, energy sources, chemical gradients, are common, and the time available for life to develop billions of years on billions of planets around billions of stars in billions of galaxies is vast beyond comprehension. The Miller-Urey experiment in 1953 demonstrated that the amino acids of life can be produced from simple, inorganic molecules, methane, ammonia, water, and hydrogen by the application of electrical discharge, simulating lightning. The experiment demonstrated that the chemistry of life is not miraculous. It is natural, the spontaneous consequence of the specific chemical conditions that the early Earth provided and that billions of other planets with similar chemical conditions could provide. The biochemist Stanley Miller's original experiment produced 5 amino acids. Subsequent experiments, using updated models of the early Earth's atmosphere, have produced all 20 amino acids that life uses, plus dozens of additional organic molecules that the prebiotic chemistry requires. The discovery of extremophile organisms on Earth, organisms that thrive in conditions previously thought incompatible with life, has expanded the range of environments that the biology considers habitable. Thermophiles live in water above 100 degrees Celsius. Psychrophiles live in ice below -20 degrees Celsius. Acidophiles live in sulfuric acid. Halophiles live in saturated salt solutions. And radio-resistant bacteria like Deinococcus radiodurans survive radiation doses that would kill a human thousands of times over. The range of habitable conditions is not narrow. It is vast, spanning temperature ranges of hundreds of degrees, pH ranges of 10 or more units, pressure ranges from near vacuum to thousands of atmospheres, and radiation environments that would sterilize most organisms. The combination of the chemical ubiquity of life's raw materials and the biological range of habitable conditions produces a prediction that is overwhelming in its implications. Life should be common, not rare, not exceptional. Common, arising on billions of planets, developing on billions of worlds, and producing, on some fraction of those worlds, the intelligence and the technology that would make the civilizations detectable. The physicist Enrico Fermi, lunching with colleagues at Los Alamos in 1950, performed a quick calculation. Given the age of the galaxy, the number of stars, the probability of habitable planets, and the time required for an advanced civilization to colonize the entire galaxy, approximately 1 million years, using sublight-speed spacecraft, the galaxy should be teeming with advanced civilizations. The evidence of their existence should be everywhere in the radio spectrum, in the infrared signatures of their energy harvesting, in the gravitational signatures of their megastructure engineering, and in the physical artifacts of their exploration. The evidence should be impossible to miss. Fermi looked up from his calculation and asked the question that has haunted physics, astronomy, and philosophy ever since. Where is everybody? The question is called the Fermi Paradox. And the answer, or more precisely, the absence of an answer, is called the Great Silence. The Great Silence is total. In over 6 decades of systematic searching from the first SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, observation by Frank Drake at the Green Bank Observatory in 1960, to the ongoing Breakthrough Listen program, funded by Yuri Milner, with $100 million, no confirmed extraterrestrial signal has been detected. No alien radio transmission. No alien laser pulse. No alien megastructure. No alien artifact. No alien visitor. No alien anything. The universe is silent as a forest at midnight, as silent as a library after closing, as silent as a room in which you are absolutely, completely, and terrifyingly alone. The silence is not for lack of looking. The SETI program has surveyed millions of stars across a wide range of radio frequencies. The Breakthrough Listen program is surveying the nearest million stars, the nearest 100 galaxies, and the entire galactic plane with the most sensitive radio telescopes on Earth. The Kepler and TESS space telescopes have surveyed hundreds of thousands of stars for the transiting signatures of alien megastructures, and the James Webb Space Telescope is analyzing the atmospheric compositions of nearby exoplanets, searching for the biosignatures, oxygen, methane, ozone that the presence of life would produce. Nothing. The universe is silent. The silence extends beyond radio. The infrared surveys conducted by the WISE Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer satellite searched for the thermal signatures of Dyson spheres megastructures that an advanced civilization might construct around a star to capture the star's entire energy output. A Dyson sphere would be detectable in the infrared, because the sphere, absorbing the star's visible light and re-radiating it as heat, would produce a specific infrared signature that no natural object can mimic. The WISE survey examined hundreds of thousands of stars. No Dyson sphere candidates were found. The Breakthrough Starshot project, funded by Yuri Milner, is developing light sail technology to send probes to the nearest star system, Alpha Centauri, 4.3 light-years away. The technology is modest by galactic standards. Light sails, propelled by ground-based lasers, accelerating to approximately 20% of the speed of light. An advanced civilization with millions of years of technological development should be capable of far more of self-replicating probes that could explore the entire galaxy in a few million years, seeding every star system with artifacts that would be detectable by any civilization that subsequently arises. The galaxy has existed for over 10 billion years. A few million years is a tiny fraction of the galaxy's age, and yet no alien probe has been detected in our solar system, no artifact on the moon, no probe in the asteroid belt, no beacon at the Lagrange points where gravitational stability would preserve an artifact for billions of years. The silence is not what the statistics predict. The astronomer Frank Drake formalized the prediction in 1961 with the Drake equation, the mathematical framework for estimating the number of detectable civilizations in the galaxy. The Drake equation multiplies 7 factors: the rate of star formation, the fraction of stars with planets, the number of habitable planets per star, the fraction of habitable planets on which life arises, the fraction of life-bearing planets on which intelligent life evolves, the fraction of intelligent civilizations that develop detectable technology, and the average lifetime of a detectable civilization. The original estimates were optimistic. Drake and his colleagues estimated that the galaxy should contain between 1,000 and 100 million detectable civilizations. The more conservative modern estimates, incorporating the Kepler data and the updated stellar formation rates, still predict between 1 and 10,000 detectable civilizations in the Milky Way alone. The galaxy should not be silent. The galaxy should be noisy, buzzing with signals, glowing with energy harvesting, and populated with the artifacts of civilizations that have had billions of years to spread across the stellar landscape. The astronomer Carl Sagan, who was among the most optimistic participants in the Drake equation's original calculation, estimated that the galaxy might contain as many as 1 million detectable civilizations. The physicist Frank Tipler, at the opposite extreme, argued that the Drake equation's optimistic estimates are unsupported by the evidence, and that the most likely value of the number of detectable civilizations is 1us. The gap between 1 million and 1 reflects the enormous uncertainty in the Drake equation's factors, particularly the last 3. The fraction of habitable planets on which life arises, which ranges from nearly all to nearly none, depending on the assumptions, the fraction of life-bearing planets on which intelligence evolves, which ranges from inevitable to extraordinarily rare, and the average lifetime of a detectable civilization, which ranges from a few centuries to millions of years. The uncertainty is the point. The Drake equation does not answer the Fermi question. It frames it, revealing that the question of whether we are alone depends on specific, measurable, potentially answerable questions about the probability of life, the probability of intelligence, and the longevity of civilizations. And the answers to these questions, when they come, will determine whether the great silence is the silence of an empty galaxy or the silence of a galaxy that is full but hiding. The physicist Michael Hart formalized the paradox in 1975. Hart argued that the absence of extraterrestrial visitors is the strongest evidence against the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations. If advanced civilizations exist, Hart reasoned, they would have had sufficient time to colonize the entire galaxy, even at sublight speeds, even with conservative estimates of the expansion rate. The fact that they have not colonized the Earth, the fact that no alien artifact has been found on the Earth, on the Moon, in the asteroid belt, or anywhere else in the solar system, is evidence that the civilizations do not exist. The silence is not a communication failure. It is an absence, the absence of the civilizations that the numbers predict should be there. The astronomer David Brin categorized the possible explanations for the Great Silence into 3 classes. The first class says they don't exist. The civilizations are not there because something prevents them from arising, from surviving, or from developing the technology that would make them detectable. The second class says they exist but are undetectable. The civilizations are there but are silent, either because they choose to be silent or because their technology is undetectable by our instruments. And the third class says they exist and are detectable, but we haven't found them yet. The civilizations are there, they are broadcasting, and our search has simply not covered enough of the sky, enough of the spectrum, or enough of the time to detect them. Each class has specific implications not only for the question of extraterrestrial life, but for the deeper question of what kind of universe we inhabit. A universe in which civilizations don't exist is a universe in which consciousness is rare, a precious, improbable, perhaps unique phenomenon that the cosmos has produced once and may never produce again. A universe in which civilizations exist but are silent is a universe in which consciousness is common but cautious. A universe in which the darkness between the stars is not empty but watchful, not vacant but vigilant. And a universe in which civilizations exist and are detectable but unfound is a universe in which consciousness is both common and bold. A universe in which the search has merely not yet succeeded, and in which the detection, when it comes, will transform the human understanding of the cosmos and our place within it. The physicist Paul Davies has described the three classes as three visions of the cosmos, each one producing a different understanding of reality, a different assessment of the human condition, and a different relationship between the individual consciousness and the universal silence that surrounds it. Let us examine each class. The first class, they don't exist, includes the Great Filter hypothesis. The Great Filter, proposed by the economist Robin Hanson in 1998, argues that somewhere in the sequence from dead matter to spacefaring civilization, there is a filter, a step that is extraordinarily difficult, extraordinarily improbable, or extraordinarily lethal. The filter prevents civilizations from reaching the stage at which they would be detectable. And the critical question is, where is the filter? If the filter is behind us, if the extraordinarily difficult step is one that we have already passed, the origin of life, the development of eukaryotic cells, the evolution of multicellular organisms, the emergence of intelligence, then we are rare. We have passed the filter. Other civilizations have not. And the silence is the silence of a galaxy in which the filter has prevented virtually every other planet from producing a detectable civilization. If the filter is ahead of us, if the extraordinarily difficult step is one that we have not yet reached, the development of sustainable technology, the avoidance of self-destruction, the transition to a post-biological civilization, then we are doomed. The filter is waiting for us. Every civilization that has reached our level of development has been destroyed by the filter, by nuclear war, by ecological collapse, by artificial intelligence, by some catastrophe that the advanced technology produces and that the advanced civilization cannot survive. And the silence is the silence of a galaxy littered with the ruins of civilizations that were destroyed by the filter that awaits us. The Great Filter's location is the most consequential scientific question that humanity faces because the answer determines whether our civilization has a future. If the filter is behind us, we have survived the hard part. The origin of life, the evolution of intelligence, the development of technology, these were the improbable steps, and we have already taken them. The road ahead may be difficult, but not impossible. If the filter is ahead of us, we are walking toward our destruction. Every civilization that has reached our stage has been destroyed. And the question is not whether the filter will destroy us, but when and whether we can, through some extraordinary effort of wisdom, technology, or cosmic luck, avoid the fate that every other civilization has suffered. The physicist Martin Rees, the astronomer royal, has estimated that the probability of human civilization surviving the 21st century is approximately 50%, a coin flip between survival and extinction, with the primary risks being nuclear war, engineered pandemics, artificial intelligence, and ecological collapse. If Rees is correct, and if the Great Filter is ahead of us, then the filter is not a single catastrophic event. It is a gauntlet, a series of existential risks that the civilization must navigate, each one potentially fatal, and the cumulative probability of surviving all of them potentially very small. The physicist Nick Bostrom has argued that the absence of extraterrestrial life is, in a specific sense, good news. It means that the filter is more likely behind us than ahead of us. The more evidence we find that life is rare, that the origin of life is improbable, that the evolution of intelligence is improbable, that the development of technology is improbable, the more confident we can be that we have already passed the filter and that the filter is not waiting for us in the future. The worst possible discovery, Bostrom argues, would be the discovery of microbial life on Mars, because it would demonstrate that the origin of life is easy, that the filter is not at the origin of life, and that the filter is therefore ahead of us, waiting to destroy us, as it has destroyed every other civilization that has reached our stage. The rare Earth hypothesis, proposed by the geologist Peter Ward and the astronomer Donald Brownlee in 2000, argues that the filter is the extraordinary combination of conditions that the Earth provides: the specific distance from the Sun, the specific mass of the planet, the specific tilt of the axis, the specific size and distance of the Moon, the specific composition of the atmosphere, the specific presence of plate tectonics, the specific presence of a magnetic field, the specific presence of Jupiter as a gravitational shield against asteroid impacts, and that the combination is so specific, so improbable, and so difficult to replicate that the Earth may be one of a very small number of planets in the galaxy that can support complex life. The silence is the silence of a galaxy in which the conditions for complex life are extraordinarily rare. The rare Earth hypothesis has been challenged by the discovery of extremophile organisms, which expand the range of habitable conditions far beyond what Ward and Brownlee assumed, by the discovery of potentially habitable exoplanets, including several in the habitable zones of nearby stars, and by the theoretical arguments of the astrobiologist Charles Cockell, who has argued that life is so chemically robust that it will arise on any planet with liquid water and a source of energy. But the rare Earth hypothesis has not been refuted, because the question is not whether simple life is common, but whether complex, intelligent, technology-producing life is common. The gap between bacteria and a civilization is vast, 3.5 billion years of evolution on Earth, including at least 5 mass extinction events that nearly eliminated life entirely. The universe may be full of bacteria, it may be empty of civilizations, and the silence may be the silence of a galaxy in which microbial life is ubiquitous, but intelligent life is extraordinarily rare. The second class they exist but are silent includes the dark forest hypothesis. The dark forest hypothesis argues that the universe is not empty. It is full of civilizations, full of intelligence, full of technology. But the civilizations are silent deliberately, strategically, and necessarily silent because the alternative to silence is destruction. The argument runs as follows. The universe is a dark forest. Every civilization is a hunter in the forest. The hunter does not know where the other hunters are. The hunter does not know whether the other hunters are friendly or hostile. And the hunter knows that any signal, any radio transmission, any laser pulse, any detectable signature of any kind will reveal the hunter's position to every other hunter in the forest. The hunter who reveals their position is the hunter who gets shot. The rational strategy is silence absolute, total, permanent silence, because any deviation from silence is a potential death sentence. The logic is game theoretic. In a universe with limited resources and an unknown number of civilizations with unknown intentions, the safest strategy for any civilization is to remain hidden. A civilization that broadcasts its position is advertising its existence to every other civilization in the galaxy, including civilizations that may be hostile, that may be technologically superior, and that may regard the broadcasting civilization as a threat, a competitor, or a resource to be exploited. The cost of silence is zero. The cost of broadcasting is potentially infinite: the destruction of the civilization by a more advanced predator that detected the signal and decided that the safest response was to eliminate the source. The dark forest hypothesis explains the great silence without requiring the civilizations to be absent. The civilizations are there. They are intelligent. They are technologically advanced, but they are silent because they have calculated correctly that silence is the optimal strategy in a universe where the intentions of other civilizations are unknown, and the consequences of detection are potentially catastrophic. The dark forest logic is reinforced by a specific feature of interstellar communication: the time delay. A radio signal from a civilization 1,000 light-years away takes 1,000 years to reach us, and our response takes 1,000 years to reach them. The conversation takes 2,000 years per exchange. In 2,000 years, civilizations rise and fall, technologies transform beyond recognition, and the intentions of the communicating parties may change completely. The uncertainty is not merely about the current intentions of the other civilization. It is about the future intentions, the intentions that the other civilization will have in 1,000 years, in 10,000 years, in 1,000,000 years. And the uncertainty about future intentions makes the dark forest logic even more compelling. Even if the other civilization is currently friendly, it may become hostile in the future, and the signal that you sent in friendship may be received 1,000 years later by a civilization that regards your existence as a threat. The mathematician John von Neumann demonstrated that the optimal strategy in a game with unknown opponents and unknown intentions is the minimax strategy, the strategy that minimizes the maximum possible loss. In the Dark Forest game, the maximum possible loss is the destruction of the civilization, and the strategy that minimizes this maximum loss is silence, absolute, permanent, unbroken silence that reveals nothing, risks nothing, and concedes nothing to the unknown hunters in the dark forest. The physicist Stephen Hawking endorsed a version of the dark forest reasoning when he warned against the transmission of signals into space if aliens ever visit us. I think the outcome would be much as when Christopher Columbus first landed in America, which didn't turn out very well for the Native Americans. Hawking's warning is the dark forest logic applied to Earth. Broadcasting our existence to the galaxy may be the most dangerous thing that our civilization has ever done. The third class they exist and are detectable, but we haven't found them yet, includes the zoo hypothesis. Advanced civilizations are deliberately avoiding contact, treating the Earth as a nature preserve. The Transcension hypothesis. Advanced civilizations transcend into the inner dimensions of space-time rather than expanding outward, and the simple statistical argument that SETI has surveyed only a tiny fraction of the galaxy's stars across a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum for a tiny fraction of the galaxy's history. The astronomer Jill Tarter, the former director of the SETI Institute, described the scale of the search with an analogy. If the volume of the galaxy's search space is the volume of the Earth's oceans, then the amount that SETI has searched so far is approximately the volume of a drinking glass. We have searched a glass of water from the ocean and concluded that there are no fish. Tarter's analogy is humbling. The silence may not be the silence of an empty universe. It may be the silence of an insufficient search, the silence of a glass of water extracted from an ocean that is teeming with life that the glass simply did not capture. The Transcension hypothesis, proposed by the futurist John Smart, adds a dimension that connects the Fermi Paradox to the themes of this series. Smart argues that advanced civilizations do not expand outward into space. They transcend inward into the inner dimensions of space-time, into the Planck scale structure, into the quantum substrate that our investigation of the hidden layer identified as the deepest level of physical reality. The Transcension hypothesis proposes that the great silence is not the silence of absent civilizations. It is the silence of civilizations that have transcended the physical, that have left the three-dimensional spatial world and entered the deeper, non-spatial, informationally richer dimensions that the string theory's extra dimensions and the holographic principle's informational boundary describe. The Transcension hypothesis connects the Fermi Paradox to the contemplative traditions in a specific way. The Transcension that Smart describes is structurally identical to the liberation that the traditions describe. The Hindu moksha, the liberation from the cycle of birth and death, is a transcension from the spatial to the non-spatial. The Buddhist nibbana, the cessation of the conditioned, is a transcension from the structured to the unstructured. And the Christian theosis, the union with the divine, is a transcension from the finite to the infinite. The advanced civilizations may have achieved what the contemplative traditions describe: the transcension from the visible surface into the hidden layer, from the spatial to the non-spatial, from the conditioned to the unconditioned. And the silence is the silence of civilizations that are no longer in the spatial universe because they have entered the deeper reality that the spatial universe conceals. But the silence is not merely an observational fact. It is an existential confrontation, a confrontation between the human expectation that the universe should be populated, that consciousness should be common, that intelligence should be widespread, and the stark, unyielding, terrifying reality that the universe, as far as we can detect, is silent. The contemplative traditions have a different relationship with silence. In Hinduism, the concept of mauna, sacred silence, the deliberate practice of non-speaking as a spiritual discipline, describes silence not as an absence, but as a presence. The silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of Brahman, the infinite, formless, attributeless ground of being that the sound conceals and that the silence reveals. The Mandukya Upanishad's analysis of Om identifies the silence after the chanting as the fourth state Turiya, the state in which the consciousness perceives Brahman directly. The silence is not empty, it is full of the presence that the noise was concealing, full of the awareness that the activity was drowning out, full of the being that the doing was obscuring. The Chandogya Upanishad describes the ultimate reality as neti neti, not this, a reality that cannot be described by any positive statement, that cannot be captured by any word, and that is best approached through the progressive negation of every description until the silence remains. The silence is the Upanishad's description of Brahman, not because Brahman is silent in the sense of being absent, but because Brahman is beyond language, beyond description, and beyond the noise of the conceptual mind. The cosmic silence, the great silence of the Fermi Paradox, may be the universe's neti neti, the universe saying, through its silence, I am not what you are looking for. I am not the radio signal. I am not the megastructure. I am not the artifact. I am the silence itself, the vast, infinite, conscious silence that you will perceive when you stop looking for the noise and begin to perceive the quiet. In Buddhism, the concept of noble silence, Arya Tunhabaha, describes the silence that the Buddha maintained on questions that he considered unanswerable or counterproductive. The Buddha's silence on the questions of the universe's origin, the universe's extent, and the existence of the soul is not a failure to answer. It is an answer, the answer, that some questions are better addressed through silence than through speech, that some truths are better perceived in the quiet of the mind than in the noise of the intellect, and that the deepest reality is not captured by words, but is revealed by the absence of words. In Christianity, the prophet Elijah's encounter with God on Mount Horeb describes the divine presence as manifesting not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in the still, small voice that followed the silence. The divine is not in the noise, The divine is in the silence, in the quiet that follows the cessation of every external stimulus and every internal disturbance, in the stillness that the contemplative practice produces and that the Hesychasm tradition identifies as the condition for perceiving the divine presence. The Taoist tradition describes the cosmic silence through the concept of wu-nothingness, the pregnant void, the creative emptiness from which the 10,000 things arise. The Tao Te Ching states, "The Tao is empty, yet it is infinitely capable." The emptiness is not the absence of content. It is the presence of infinite potential, the silence from which all sound arises, the stillness from which all motion begins, the nothing from which everything is born. The cosmic silence may be the Wu, the Tao's creative emptiness, infinitely capable, infinitely productive, and infinitely silent, because the silence is the condition for the creation, not the absence of the creation. The contemplative traditions thus provide a radical reframing of the Fermi Paradox. The paradox assumes that the universe should be noisy, filled with signals, broadcasting with technology, buzzing with the electromagnetic evidence of advanced civilizations. The traditions suggest that the universe should be silent, that silence is the natural state, the preferred state, and the most profound state of a reality whose deepest quality is not activity but stillness, not noise but quiet, not broadcasting but listening. The traditions suggest a possibility that the physics has not considered. The cosmic silence may not be a problem. It may not be an absence that requires explanation. It may be a presence, the presence of a reality that is, by its nature, silent, that is best perceived in silence, and that the universe's vast, terrifying, apparently empty silence is revealing to anyone who has the contemplative capacity to perceive it. The question of whether the cosmic silence is an absence, the Fermi Paradox, or a presence, the contemplative tradition's sacred silence, is the question that the next stage of this investigation will pursue. We have established that the universe is silent, that 6 decades of systematic searching have produced no confirmed detection of extraterrestrial intelligence, that the silence contradicts the statistical expectation of a universe teeming with civilizations, and that the possible explanations range from the civilization's absence, the great filter, to their strategic silence, the dark forest, to their transcension into dimensions that our instruments cannot detect. Each explanation addresses the silence as a problem, as an absence that requires explanation, as a gap between the expected and the observed that the theories must fill. But there is a deeper question that the Fermi Paradox debate has overlooked. What if the silence is not a problem? What if the silence is a feature, a fundamental, structural, physically necessary feature of the kind of universe that the physics describes? What if the universe is silent, not because the civilizations are absent, not because they are hiding, and not because they have transcended, but because the universe itself, at its deepest level, is constituted by silence? The physics of the past century provides specific reasons to take this possibility seriously. The first reason is the quantum vacuum. We established in our investigation of the hidden layer that the quantum vacuum is not empty. It is the most energetic, the most complex, and the most informationally rich structure in the known universe, seething with virtual particles, fluctuating with zero-point energy, and encoding, in its Planck scale geometry, the complete information content of the holographic boundary. The vacuum is full, but the vacuum is silent. The silence of the vacuum is not an accident. It is a consequence of the vacuum's specific quantum properties. The vacuum's fluctuations are symmetric. For every virtual particle that appears, an antiparticle simultaneously appears, and the pair annihilates before producing any lasting, detectable signal. The vacuum's energy is uniform, the same at every point, in every direction, at every moment, producing no gradient, no asymmetry, and no detectable pattern that could be interpreted as a signal. and the vacuum's information is encoded, stored in the Planck scale geometry, compressed into the holographic boundary, and inaccessible to any instrument that operates at the macroscopic scales of the electromagnetic detection that SETI employs. The vacuum is the most information-rich structure in the universe, and it is absolutely silent. The information is there, encoded, preserved, and complete. But the information does not broadcast. It does not emit signals. It does not produce detectable radiation. It exists in a state of perfect, symmetric, self-contained silence. A silence that is not the absence of information, but the most concentrated, the most compressed, and the most efficient form of information storage that the physics describes. The silence of the vacuum is the template for the silence of the universe. The vacuum is the universe's ground state, the state of minimum energy, maximum stability, and zero signal. Every signal that the universe produces, every photon, every radio wave, every electromagnetic emission of any kind, is an excitation above the ground state. The excitation is temporary, the ground state is permanent, and the return of every excitation to the ground state, the return of every signal to the silence from which it arose, is the thermodynamic inevitability that the second law prescribes. The signals are the exceptions, the silence is the rule, and the rule, in the long run, always wins. The physicist Werner Heisenberg described the vacuum's relationship to the physical world with an image that captures the silence's priority. The vacuum is not nothing. It is the ground from which everything arises, and the ground is silent, not because it lacks content, but because its content is in perfect equilibrium, in perfect balance, in perfect self-containment. The vacuum does not need to broadcast. The vacuum is complete. The completeness is the silence's source. The vacuum is silent because it is complete, because it contains everything, lacks nothing, and has no need to emit, to signal, or to communicate. The broadcasting is the signature of the incomplete, the system that lacks something and that emits a signal to obtain it. The silence is the signature of the complete, the system that lacks nothing and that has no need to emit. The physicist John Wheeler described the vacuum's silence with his concept of it from bit. The physical world arises from information, but the information, at its most fundamental level, is not expressed as physical signals. It is encoded in the quantum structure of space-time itself. The information is silent because it is fundamental, because it exists at a level that is deeper than the signals, deeper than the radiation, and deeper than the electromagnetic broadcasting that the SETI search assumes is the signature of intelligence. The philosopher of physics, Jeremy Butterfield, has described the vacuum's silence as the deepest fact about the physical world, the fact that the ground state of reality is not a signal but a silence, not a broadcast but an encoding, not a communication but a self-contained, self-sufficient, informationally complete structure that has no need to communicate because it already contains, within itself, every piece of information that could possibly be communicated. The vacuum's silence has a specific, measurable consequence, the Unruh effect. The physicist William Unruh demonstrated in 1976 that an accelerating observer perceives the vacuum as filled with thermal radiation, radiation that is not present for an inertial observer. The Unruh effect demonstrates that the vacuum's silence is observer-dependent. The vacuum appears silent to the inertial observer, but noisy to the accelerating observer. The noise is not in the vacuum. The noise is in the observer's frame of reference, in the specific, localized, acceleration-dependent perspective from which the observer perceives the vacuum. The silence is the vacuum's objective state. The noise is the observer's subjective experience. And the transition from silence to noise is a function of the observer's acceleration, of the observer's departure from the vacuum's natural, inertial, silent ground state. The Unruh effect implies that the cosmic silence may be frame-dependent. The universe appears silent from our specific perspective, our specific location, and our specific state of motion. From a different perspective, a perspective that the advanced civilizations may have achieved, the universe may not be silent at all. The information may be there, in the vacuum, in the boundary, in the Planck scale geometry, but accessible only from the specific frame of reference that the advanced technology or the advanced contemplative practice provides. The implication for the Fermi Paradox is specific. The most advanced information technology is not broadcasting, it is silent. The most efficient form of information storage is not a radio signal, it is the quantum vacuum. And the most sophisticated form of intelligence may not communicate through electromagnetic radiation, not because the intelligence is absent or hiding, but because the intelligence has discovered what the physics has discovered, that the deepest level of information is silent, that the most efficient form of communication is non-electromagnetic, and that the quantum structure of space-time provides an information channel that is incomparably more efficient, more secure, and more fundamental than any electromagnetic signal. The second reason is entropy. We established in our investigation of the unchanging source that the second law of thermodynamics drives every system toward maximum entropy, toward the state of maximum disorder, maximum uniformity, and maximum silence. The heat death of the universe is the ultimate silence, every gradient equalized, every temperature uniform, every structure dissolved, and every signal extinguished. The second law says that the universe is moving towards silence, that the noise of the physical world is temporary, and that the silence of the heat death is the universe's natural, thermodynamically favored, statistically inevitable final state. The physicist Ludwig Boltzmann demonstrated that entropy is a measure of the number of microstates that correspond to a given macrostate, and that the high entropy state has overwhelmingly more microstates than the low entropy state. The silence has more microstates than the noise. The uniform has more microstates than the structured. The second law does not merely predict that the universe will become silent. It explains why. The silent state is overwhelmingly more probable than the noisy state, and the universe's trajectory from the noisy past to the silent future is the trajectory from the improbable to the probable, from the exceptional to the typical, from the noisy to the quiet. The astrophysicist Fred Adams at the University of Michigan has calculated the timeline of the cosmic silence. In the current era, the stelliferous era, the universe is noisy, stars are burning, galaxies are colliding, and the electromagnetic spectrum is filled with the radiation of cosmic activity. But the stelliferous era will end in approximately 100 trillion years when the last stars exhaust their fuel. The subsequent eras, the degenerate era, the black hole era, and the dark era, are progressively quieter, progressively darker, and progressively more silent. The noise is temporary, the silence is permanent. And the current era's noise is a brief, exceptional, statistically improbable interlude in the universe's overwhelmingly silent history. The astrophysicist Milan Čurković has formalized this temporal argument as the temporal Fermi Paradox. Even if civilizations are common, the vast majority of them exist in the universe's silent eras, the degenerate, black hole, and dark eras that together constitute approximately 99.9999999999999% of the universe's total temporal extent. The civilizations of the stelliferous era, the civilizations that produce electromagnetic signals, that build megastructures, and that are detectable by SETI, represent an infinitesimally small fraction of the total number of civilizations that will ever exist. The stelliferous civilizations are the early adopters, the primitive, noisy, electromagnetically broadcasting civilizations that arise during the brief, bright, exceptional era of the universe's childhood. The mature civilizations, the civilizations of the dark eras, the civilizations that have adapted to the universe's silence, are silent because they live in a silent universe. They communicate through silent channels, and they have transcended the electromagnetic technology that the stelliferous era's energy abundance made temporarily possible. The physicist Gregory Laughlin has described the Dark Era civilizations with a specific, physically grounded vision. A civilization in the Dark Era would be unrecognizable to us. It would not use stars for energy. There are no stars. It would not use electromagnetic radiation for communication. There is no useful electromagnetic radiation. It would harvest the quantum vacuum's zero-point energy. It would communicate through quantum correlations. And it would exist in a form that our current physics cannot even describe, a form adapted to the silence, the darkness, and the near absolute zero temperatures of the universe's final state. The implication for the Fermi Paradox: we are searching for signals in the brief, noisy interlude, but the universe's natural state is silence. The civilizations that arose in the early universe have already entered the silence. Their stars have burned out, their signals have faded, and their electromagnetic presence has been erased by the entropic dissolution that the second law prescribes. The Great Silence may not be the silence of absent civilizations. It may be the silence of a universe that is, on cosmic timescales, naturally, inevitably, and thermodynamically silent. The cosmologist Max Tegmark has described the cosmic silence's timeline with a vivid analogy. Imagine the entire history of the universe as a single year. The stelliferous era, the era of stars, the era of light, the era of noise, lasts approximately the first second of January 1st. The remaining 364 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds are silent. We are living in the first second, and we are surprised that the universe is quiet. Tegmark's analogy captures the essential point. The noisy era is a vanishingly small fraction of the universe's total history. The silent era is everything else. And the Great Silence is not an anomaly of the noisy era. It is a preview of the silent era that constitutes the overwhelming majority of the universe's existence. The physicist Sean Carroll has added a thermodynamic dimension to the timeline. The low entropy initial conditions of the Big Bang, the conditions that produced the noise, the structure, the stars, and the civilizations, are not typical of the universe. They are extraordinarily atypical, a 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 123 odd fluctuation from the equilibrium that Penrose calculated. The noise is the fluctuation, the silence is the equilibrium, and the universe's trajectory from the Big Bang's noise to the heat-death silence is the trajectory from the extraordinary fluctuation back to the ordinary equilibrium, from the improbable noise back to the probable silence that constitutes the universe's natural, default, overwhelmingly favored state. The cosmic background radiation, the afterglow of the Big Bang, the oldest light in the universe, is itself a form of silence. The CMB is not a signal. It is thermal noise, the random, isotropic, structureless radiation of a system in near equilibrium. The CMB is the universe's background silence, the electromagnetic evidence that the universe's ground state is not a signal, but a uniform, featureless, informationally empty thermal bath. The signals of the stelliferous era, the starlight, the radio emissions, the electromagnetic activity of the cosmic structures, are the temporary fluctuations above this background silence, and the fluctuations will return to the background, will dissolve back into the thermal noise of the equilibrium that the second law guarantees. The third reason is the information theoretic argument. The physicist Seth Lloyd at MIT has calculated the total computational capacity of the observable universe, approximately 10 to the 120th operations. The universe's computational capacity is limited, and the limitation has a specific implication. The most efficient use of a limited computational capacity is not broadcasting. It is processing, computing, analyzing, and encoding information in the most compressed, the most efficient, and the most silent form possible. Lloyd's calculation has a specific implication for the question of advanced civilizations. A civilization that has existed for millions of years and that has had access to the universe's computational capacity would not waste that capacity on electromagnetic broadcasting. It would use the capacity for the most efficient possible computation, for the processing, analysis, and encoding of information in the quantum vacuum's silent, compressed, maximally efficient format. The civilization would have progressed from electromagnetic communication, which wastes computational capacity on redundant, omnidirectional, energetically expensive broadcasting, to quantum vacuum encoding, which uses the computational capacity with maximum efficiency, minimum energy expenditure, and zero electromagnetic emission. The physicist Freeman Dyson proposed in 1960 that an advanced civilization would construct a Dyson sphere, a megastructure that encloses a star and captures its entire energy output. But Dyson's proposal assumes that the advanced civilization needs the star's energy for electromagnetic broadcasting. If the civilization has moved to quantum vacuum encoding, it does not need the star's energy for communication. It needs it for computation, for the processing of the vacuum's informational content, for the quantum computations that access the Planck scale geometry, and for the maintenance of the quantum coherence that the advanced technology requires. And the computation is silent. The Dyson sphere would not emit the infrared waste heat that SETI searches for, because the computation does not waste heat. The quantum computation is reversible, the quantum information is conserved, and the energy is used without the thermodynamic waste that the classical computation produces. The information theorist Claude Shannon demonstrated in 1948 that the capacity of a communication channel is maximized when the signal approaches the channel's noise floor, when the signal is as quiet as possible, while still being distinguishable from the noise. The most efficient communication is not the loudest, it is the quietest, the signal that uses the minimum energy, the minimum bandwidth, and the minimum electromagnetic presence to transmit the maximum information. An advanced civilization that has discovered Shannon's theorem would communicate not by broadcasting loudly but by whispering as quietly as possible. The physicist Gregory Benford has formalized this as the Benford beacons hypothesis. An advanced civilization would not broadcast omnidirectionally. It would transmit a highly focused, narrowband, low-power beam directed at specific targets, virtually undetectable by any receiver not in the beam's narrow path. SETI is looking for the omnidirectional broadcast. The advanced civilization is sending the focused whisper. The Benford beacons hypothesis has a specific implication for SETI. The search strategy is wrong. SETI has been searching for the loudest possible signal, the omnidirectional, high-power, easily detectable broadcast that a civilization would produce if it wanted to be found. But the Benford analysis shows that a civilization that is communicating efficiently would not produce such a signal, because the omnidirectional broadcast wastes energy, wastes bandwidth, and advertises the civilization's position to every potential predator in the galaxy, the dark forest logic. The efficient communicator is the quiet communicator, and the quiet communicator is, by design, the undetectable communicator. The physicist, James Benford, Gregory's brother, has extended the analysis to include the economics of interstellar communication. Benford calculated the cost per bit of omnidirectional radio broadcasting versus targeted microwave beaming and found that the targeted beam is approximately 10 billion times more cost-effective. Any civilization that has discovered the economics of interstellar communication, and any civilization with interstellar communication technology has certainly discovered it, would use the targeted beam rather than the omnidirectional broadcast. The targeted beam is quiet, the omnidirectional broadcast is loud, and SETI is searching for the loud signal that no economically rational civilization would produce. The quantum physicist Charles Bennett has extended the argument. The most efficient communication channel is the quantum channel, using quantum entanglement to transmit information with zero electromagnetic emission. Quantum communication is not merely quiet, it is silent, perfectly, absolutely, fundamentally silent, because the information is transmitted through quantum correlations rather than electromagnetic radiation. A civilization that has mastered quantum communication would be electromagnetically invisible, not because it is hiding, but because it has transcended electromagnetic communication entirely. The physicist Anton Zeilinger, who shared the 2022 Nobel Prize for his experiments on quantum entanglement, has described the quantum communication's implications for SETI. Quantum communication is fundamentally different from classical communication. Classical communication broadcasts a signal that any receiver can detect. Quantum communication establishes a correlation that only the intended receiver can access. The quantum channel is private, secure, and silent, and any civilization that has discovered quantum entanglement would have abandoned electromagnetic broadcasting the way we abandoned the telegraph when we discovered the telephone. Zeilinger's analogy is precise. The electromagnetic spectrum is the telegraph of the cosmos. It is old technology that the most primitive civilizations use because they have not yet discovered anything better. The quantum channel is the telephone, the advanced technology that the advanced civilizations use because it is more efficient, more secure, and fundamentally silent. The great silence is the silence of a galaxy that has moved on from the electromagnetic telegraph to the quantum telephone, and SETI, searching the electromagnetic spectrum for the telegraph's signals, is listening on a channel that the advanced civilization stopped using millions of years ago. The implication is striking. The most advanced civilizations may be communicating right now, and SETI would detect nothing. The communication is quantum, the channel is silent, and the electromagnetic search is the equivalent of searching for smoke signals in a civilization that has invented the telephone. The fourth reason is the holographic principle. We established in our investigation of the hidden layer that the three-dimensional visible world is a projection from a two-dimensional informational boundary. The holographic principle has a specific implication for the cosmic silence. The deepest communication may not occur in the bulk at all. If the boundary is more fundamental than the bulk, then the deepest information exchange may occur on the boundary, non-spatially, non-electromagnetically, and non-detectably by any instrument that operates in the three-dimensional bulk. The physicist Leonard Susskind has described the holographic boundary as the deepest level of physical reality, a level at which the spatial concepts of distance, direction, and propagation do not apply. Communication on the boundary would not involve the transmission of signals across spatial distances. It would involve the modification of the boundary's informational content, reflected instantaneously and non-locally in the bulk's spatial structure. The communication would be silent because it would not occur in the spatial domain that the electromagnetic instruments monitor. The physicist Raphael Bousso has proposed that the holographic principle implies a specific limit on the amount of information that can be transmitted through the bulk, the Buso bound, which states that the information crossing any light sheet is bounded by the area of the sheet in Planck units. The Buso bound is the ultimate bandwidth limit, the maximum amount of information that the three-dimensional world can carry through any spatial region. And the bound is tight. The maximum information density of the bulk is far less than the information density of the boundary. The bulk is informationally impoverished relative to the boundary, and a civilization that has discovered the Buso bound would recognize that the bulk, the three-dimensional spatial world in which electromagnetic signals propagate, is an inefficient, bandwidth-limited, informationally impoverished communication medium. The boundary is where the information is. The bulk is where the shadows are, and the shadows are silent because the information that produces them is encoded on the boundary, not broadcast through the bulk. The physicist Eric Verlinde has proposed that even gravity itself, the force that shapes the cosmic web, that holds galaxies together, and that produces the spatial structures in which civilizations arise, is a holographic phenomenon, an entropic force that emerges from the boundary's informational structure, rather than propagating through the bulk as a fundamental force. If Verlinde is correct, then the most fundamental force in the universe is not a signal in the bulk. It is an effect of the boundary, a silent, non-propagating, informationally encoded phenomenon that produces the spatial structures without broadcasting a spatial signal. The universe's deepest force is silent. The universe's deepest information is silent. And the universe's deepest intelligence, if it exists, may be silent for the same reason. It operates on the boundary rather than in the bulk, communicates through information rather than through signals, and exists in the domain that the spatial instruments cannot access. The four reasons converge on a single, extraordinary possibility. The Great Silence may not be a bug. It may be a feature, a structural, physical, information-theoretic feature of a universe in which the deepest level of reality is silent, the most efficient communication is silent, the thermodynamic destiny is silence, and the most advanced civilizations have discovered what the physics has discovered, that the silence is not the absence of intelligence, but the signature of the most advanced intelligence. The convergence of the four reasons, the quantum vacuum's silence, the entropic destiny towards silence, the information-theoretic efficiency of silence, and the holographic principle's non-spatial information, produces a picture of the universe that is radically different from the picture that the Fermi Paradox presupposes. The Fermi Paradox presupposes a noisy universe, a universe in which intelligent civilizations broadcast electromagnetic signals that can be detected across interstellar distances. The physics describes a silent universe, a universe in which the deepest information is non-electromagnetic, the most efficient communication is non-spatial, the thermodynamic destiny is silence, and the ground state of reality is a perfectly symmetric, perfectly balanced, perfectly silent quantum vacuum. The Great Silence is not an anomaly in a noisy universe. It is the norm in a silent universe. And the noise, the electromagnetic activity of the stelliferous era, the signals that SETI searches for, the broadcasting that the Fermi Paradox assumes, is the anomaly, the brief, exceptional, thermodynamically improbable fluctuation above the silence that constitutes the universe's natural, default, overwhelmingly favored state. The physicist Paul Davies has described this possibility with characteristic precision. We are searching for extraterrestrial intelligence using 20th century technology. If the extraterrestrial intelligence is millions of years ahead of us, its technology will be as far beyond our radio telescopes as our radio telescopes are beyond the stone tools of our ancestors. We are looking for smoke signals. They're using quantum gravity, Davy's observation implies a specific timeline for the transition from electromagnetic to non-electromagnetic communication. Human civilization has used electromagnetic communication for approximately 130 years, from Marconi's first radio transmission in 1895 to the present. Quantum communication experiments have already been conducted over distances of thousands of kilometers, from the Chinese Microsat satellite's quantum key distribution experiments to the European Quantum Network projects. The transition from electromagnetic to quantum communication may occur within a few decades, within a few centuries at most. A civilization that is millions of years ahead of us would have completed this transition millions of years ago, and for the past millions of years, the civilization would have been electromagnetically silent, not because it stopped communicating, but because it started communicating in a way that electromagnetic instruments cannot detect. The physicist Avi Loeb at Harvard has described the implication. The absence of electromagnetic signals does not mean the absence of intelligence. It may mean the presence of intelligence that has moved beyond the electromagnetic, the way we have moved beyond smoke signals, beyond semaphore, beyond every primitive communication technology that our ancestors used. The electromagnetic spectrum is our smoke signal, and the advanced civilizations have moved on. The contemplative traditions have been describing the silence's intelligence for millennia. The Hindu tradition describes Brahman as the silent ground of all reality, the intelligence that pervades the universe without producing any detectable signal. The Buddhist tradition describes the Dharmakaya as the luminous silence, the awareness that is perceived not through detection but through the stilling of the mind's noise. And the Christian tradition describes the divine as the still, small voice, the intelligence that speaks in the silence, and that is heard not by instruments but by the contemplative faculty of the purified consciousness. The Sufi tradition adds a specific dimension through the concept of the Sir, the innermost secret, the deepest level of the heart, the point at which the individual consciousness is in direct, unmediated, silent contact with the divine consciousness. The Sir is not perceived through the senses. It is not accessed through the intellect. It is accessed through the silence, the deep, sustained, contemplative silence that the Sufi practice of muraqabah, silent meditation, produces. The Sir is the Sufi's antenna, the point of contact between the human consciousness and the cosmic intelligence that the silence contains. And the contact is silent because the intelligence that the Sir perceives is itself silent, communicating not through signals but through presence, not through broadcasting but through being, not through the noisy electromagnetic spectrum, but through the silent, non-spatial, non-temporal dimension of reality that the contemplative practice reveals. The physicist and contemplative Arthur Zajonc, in his book Catching the Light, described the relationship between scientific observation and contemplative perception. Science looks outward, with instruments, for signals. Contemplation looks inward, with attention, for presence. Both are legitimate modes of investigation, and the universe may require both, the outward look that detects the signals and the inward look that perceives the silence, to reveal its full nature. The traditions suggest that the universe's silence is not empty. It is full of the intelligence that the physics describes as the quantum vacuum's information, the holographic boundaries encoding, and the Planck scale geometry's non-computable content. The silence is not the absence of intelligence, it is the intelligence's preferred mode of being. The question of whether the cosmic silence is the absence of intelligence or the presence of the most advanced intelligence is the question that the next stage of this investigation will pursue through the contemplative tradition's detailed descriptions of what the silence contains, how the trained consciousness can perceive the intelligence that the silence conceals, and what the perception of the silent intelligence reveals about the nature of the universe, the nature of consciousness, and the nature of the relationship between the two. The physicist John Wheeler described the relationship with his characteristic blend of precision and wonder. The universe is not only queerer than we suppose, it is queerer than we can suppose. The silence may be the queerness, the feature of the universe that our electromagnetic assumptions cannot accommodate, that our signal-searching instruments cannot detect, and that our noise-producing civilization cannot comprehend. The silence may be the universe's deepest message, a message that is delivered not through broadcasting but through being, not through signals but through presence, and not through noise but through the vast, infinite, terrifyingly beautiful quiet that the contemplative traditions have been perceiving since the first human being sat down, closed their eyes, and listened to the silence. We have established that the physics provides 4 specific reasons why the universe may be fundamentally silent. The quantum vacuum encodes its information without broadcasting. The second law drives every system toward the silence of maximum entropy. The information theory demonstrates that the most efficient communication is the quietest, and the holographic principle locates the deepest information on a non-spatial boundary that the spatial instruments cannot detect. The great silence in this framework is not a problem. It is a feature, the structural signature of a universe whose deepest level is constituted by silence. Now, we must examine what the contemplative traditions say about silence. Because the traditions have a relationship with silence that is fundamentally different from the relationship that the Fermi Paradox debate assumes. The Fermi Paradox treats silence as absence, the absence of signals, the absence of intelligence, the absence of the cosmic company that the statistics predict. The traditions treat silence as presence, the presence of the deepest reality, the presence of the most fundamental intelligence, and the presence of a truth that can only be perceived when the noise of the ordinary mind ceases and the silence that underlies the noise is allowed to emerge. The traditions do not merely tolerate silence, they cultivate it, they seek it, they regard it as the single most important condition for perceiving the nature of reality, and their descriptions of what the silence contains, the specific, detailed, phenomenologically rich descriptions of the reality that is perceived in the silence, constitute a body of experiential evidence about the nature of cosmic silence that the physics debate has entirely overlooked. We will begin with Hinduism, which provides the most comprehensive philosophical framework for understanding silence as the ground of reality. The Hindu tradition identifies silence, mauna, as one of the most powerful spiritual practices. Mauna is not merely the absence of speech. It is the progressive stilling of every level of mental activity, the stilling of the spoken word, the stilling of the thought, the stilling of the emotion, and the stilling of the subtlest impulse of the mind, until the consciousness rests in the absolute silence that the Mandukya Upanishad identifies as Turiya, the fourth state, the state in which the consciousness perceives Brahman directly. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad describes the teaching of silence through the story of Bashkali. A student asks the sage Bashkali to teach him Brahman. Bashkali remains silent. The student asks again. Bashkali remains silent. The student asks a third time. Bashkali responds, "I have been teaching you, but you do not understand." Brahman is silence. The teaching is the silence, and the failure to understand is the failure to perceive what the silence contains. The infinite, formless, attributeless ground of being that cannot be communicated through words because words are noise. Words are vibrations. Words are perturbations of the silence, that the silence itself must remain undisturbed in order to reveal. The Isha Upanishad opens with a declaration that connects silence to the cosmic order. All this, whatever moves in this moving world, is pervaded by the Lord. The pervading is silent. The The Lord does not announce the pervading through electromagnetic signals. The Lord does not broadcast the pervading through detectable radiation. The pervading is silent, omnipresent, and imperceptible to every instrument except the instrument of the stilled consciousness. The Isha Upanishad's Lord is the cosmic intelligence that the Fermi Paradox searches for with radio telescopes, and the Upanishad's answer is that the intelligence is already here, already everywhere, already pervading every point of the universe, but silent, perceivable only through the silence of the mind that matches the silence of the intelligence it seeks to perceive. The Kena Upanishad adds a specific epistemological point, that which is not thought by the mind, but by which the mind thinks. Know that alone as Brahman, not what people worship as an object. The cosmic intelligence is not an object that the mind can detect. It is the subject, the awareness that enables the detection, the consciousness that powers the mind, the intelligence that underlies the instruments. The SETI search looks for the intelligence as an object, a signal, a structure, a detectable artifact. The Upanishad says, the intelligence is not an object. It is the subject, the awareness that is doing the looking, the consciousness that is operating the telescope, the intelligence that is asking the question. The intelligence is not out there. It is in here, in the silence of the awareness that the noise of the searching obscures. The sage Dakshinamurti, an aspect of Shiva, the cosmic consciousness, is depicted in the Hindu iconography as teaching in silence. Dakshinamurti sits beneath a banyan tree, surrounded by aged sages who have come to learn, and teaches through silence alone. The teaching is not transmitted through words, through concepts, through arguments, or through any form of communication that the electromagnetic spectrum could detect. The teaching is transmitted through presence, through the silent, non-verbal, non-conceptual transmission of the truth that the teacher embodies and that the student, sitting in the teacher's silence, perceives directly. The Dakshinamurti teaching is the Hindu tradition's answer to the Fermi Paradox. The deepest intelligence does not broadcast. It is present. It does not transmit signals. It transmits silence. And the silence is not the absence of the teaching. It is the teaching, the most direct, the most efficient, and the most complete transmission of the truth that no signal, no word, and no electromagnetic emission could ever convey. The practice of mauna, the deliberate cultivation of silence as a spiritual discipline, is practiced across the Hindu tradition. The sadhu who takes a vow of silence for 12 years, the yogi who sits in silent meditation for hours each day, the devotee who observes mauna on specific holy days. Each practice is a technology for clearing the antenna, for reducing the noise of the mind, the noise of the speech, and the noise of the mental activity that prevents the consciousness from perceiving the silence that underlies the noise and that constitutes the ground of reality. The Ramana Maharshi Ashram in Tiruvannamalai, India, preserves the tradition of silent teaching to this day. Visitors report that the most profound experiences occur not during the scheduled talks or the guided meditations, but during the periods of collective silence, the periods in which hundreds of practitioners sit together in the Puruve meditation hall in complete silence, and the silence itself becomes the teaching. The collective silence is qualitatively different from the individual silence. The practitioners report a deepening, an intensification, and a clarification of the silence that the individual practice does not produce. The collective silence is more than the sum of its individual components. It is a resonance, a mutual amplification, a shared accessing of the ground of reality that the individual silence approaches, but that the collective silence, through the synchronization of multiple consciousnesses in a single, unified, shared silence, achieves more fully. The physicist Rupert Sheldrake, has proposed that the collective silence may involve a specific physical mechanism, morphic resonance, the hypothesized field through which the patterns of one system influence the patterns of similar systems. Sheldrake's hypothesis is controversial but relevant. If the collective silence involves a resonance between consciousnesses, a synchronization of the brain's quantum antennas through a shared field, then the collective meditation may be a technology for amplifying the reception of the cosmic signal through the constructive interference of multiple antennas operating in phase. The collective silence is not merely many individuals being quiet at the same time. It is a phased array, a coordinated, synchronized, constructively interfering ensemble of biological antennas that receives the cosmic signal with a sensitivity that exceeds any individual antenna's capacity. The neurophysiological effects of sustained silence have been studied by the researcher Imke Kerste at Duke University. Kerste found that 2 hours of sustained silence per day produced the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus, the brain region associated with memory, learning, and the integration of experience. The silence did not merely rest the brain. The silence grew the brain, producing new neural structures that the noise of the ordinary environment does not produce. The silence is not inert. It is generative, producing, from its own stillness, the neural structures that the noise suppresses and that the silence reveals. The neuroscientist Luciano Bernardi at the University of Pavia studied the physiological effects of silence inserted between periods of music and found that the 2-minute silent pauses produced greater relaxation, lower heart rate, lower blood pressure, lower cortisol than any of the musical selections. The silence was not merely the absence of stimulus. The silence was actively restorative, producing specific, measurable, physiologically beneficial effects that the sound, regardless of its content, could not produce. The silence heals. The noise, even pleasant noise, does not heal as effectively as the silence. The environmental psychologist Craig Zimring at Georgia Institute of Technology has documented the cognitive effects of noise reduction in hospital environments. Patients in quieter rooms healed faster, required less pain medication, and reported higher satisfaction than patients in noisier rooms, even when the noise levels were within the acceptable range that the hospital standards permit. The silence is not merely the absence of disturbance. The silence is the presence of healing, the condition in which the body's restorative processes operate most efficiently, in which the brain's integrative processes function most effectively, and in which the consciousness's perceptive processes achieve their highest clarity. The physicist and contemplative Arthur Zeonk has described the relationship between silence and perception. Silence is not the absence of something. Silence is the presence of everything. Everything that the noise was drowning out, everything that the activity was concealing, everything that the sound was masking. The silence does not subtract. The silence reveals. The Chandogya Upanishad describes the relationship between silence and reality with an image that connects the Hindu understanding to the physics of the quantum vacuum. The space inside a jar is the same as the space outside the jar. The jar's walls do not create the space inside. The walls merely define a boundary, a filtering, a constraining, a selecting of a portion of the infinite space. Break the jar, and the inside space merges with the outside space, because the inside space was always the outside space, merely filtered by the jar's walls. The brain is the jar. The consciousness is the space. The silence is the space without the jar, the consciousness without the brain's filtering, the awareness without the mind's noise, the infinite merging with the infinite that the jar's walls had been preventing. In Buddhism, the tradition of noble silence provides the most detailed practice-based framework for the cultivation of cosmic silence. the Buddha's noble silence, the silence that he maintained on the 14 unanswerable questions, including the questions of the universe's origin, the universe's extent, and the nature of the self after death, is not a refusal to answer. It is a pedagogical strategy, a demonstration that some truths are better transmitted through silence than through speech, and that the attempt to capture the deepest truths in words distorts the truths more than the silence conceals them. The Vimamsaka Sutta describes the Buddha's instruction to his students. Do not accept a teaching because of the teacher's authority. Do not accept a teaching because of tradition. Do not accept a teaching because of logical argument. Accept a teaching only when you have verified it through your own direct experience. The instruction is a pointing towards silence, toward the direct, non-verbal, non-conceptual experience that the silence of the mind makes possible, and that no verbal teaching, no logical argument, and no electromagnetic signal could ever replace. The Lankavatara Sutra describes the Buddha's silence as the noble silence of the Tathagata, the silence that is not the absence of teaching but the highest form of teaching, the teaching that transcends words, that communicates the truth directly from the teacher's consciousness to the student's consciousness, without the mediation of language, without the distortion of concepts, and without the noise of the intellectual processing that verbal teaching inevitably produces. The Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna formalized the relationship between silence and truth in his Madhyamaka philosophy. The ultimate truth, Paramartha Satya, cannot be expressed in words. Words operate in the domain of the conventional truth, Samvriti Satya, the domain of concepts, categories, and linguistic distinctions that the mind uses to navigate the surface of reality. The ultimate truth, the truth of sunyata, the truth of emptiness, the truth of the nature of reality at its deepest level, is beyond words, beyond concepts, and beyond every form of verbal or electromagnetic communication. The ultimate truth is perceived in silence, in the direct, non-conceptual, non-verbal awareness that the meditation produces and that the silence enables. Nagarjuna's distinction between the two truths maps onto the Fermi Paradox with remarkable precision. The conventional truth operates through signals, through the electromagnetic radiation, the radio waves, the detectable emissions that SETI searches for. The ultimate truth operates through silence, through the non-verbal, non-electromagnetic, non-detectable presence that the contemplative practice perceives. The civilizations that operate at the level of the conventional truth broadcast signals. The civilizations that have attained the level of the ultimate truth are silent, not because they have nothing to communicate, but because the truth they have attained cannot be communicated through signals and can only be perceived through the silence. The Vipassana retreat, the intensive meditation practice that constitutes the core of the Theravada Buddhist contemplative tradition, is conducted in silence. The practitioners do not speak, they do not read, they do not write, they do not make eye contact. They sit in silence for 10 to 14 hours per day, observing the arising and passing away of every sensation, every thought, and every emotion. And the silence is not the absence of activity. It is the condition for the deepest activity, the direct observation of the nature of reality at the level of immediate experience, the level that words cannot reach and that noise cannot reveal. The Vipassana teacher S.N. Goenka, who established the global network of Vipassana meditation centers that has introduced the practice to millions of people worldwide, described the silence's function. The silence is not the goal. The silence is the laboratory in which you observe the nature of reality at the deepest level, the level of sensation, the level of arising and passing, the level at which the apparently solid, permanent, independently existing world reveals itself to be a flow of impermanent, interdependent, constantly changing events. The silence is the condition for the observation. Without the silence, the observation is impossible, because the noise of the mind creates the illusion of solidity, permanence, and independent existence that the observation is designed to dissolve. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition adds a specific dimension through the practice of the dark retreat, the practice of meditating in complete darkness and complete silence for extended periods, typically 3 to 49 days. The dark retreat combines the visual silence, the absence of light, with the auditory silence, the absence of sound, producing a sensory deprivation environment in which the brain's filtering is maximally reduced and the consciousness's access to the deeper levels of reality is maximally enhanced. The dark retreat practitioner reports the progressive emergence of inner light, the thogal visions, inner sound, the rang skra, the natural sound, and inner knowing, the rigpa, the non-dual awareness, all arising from the silence, all produced by the silence, and all accessible only through the silence that the sensory deprivation provides. The dark retreat is the Buddhist tradition's most radical experiment in cosmic silence. The practitioner deliberately creates the conditions of the great silence: no light, no sound, no signal, no stimulus of any kind, and discovers, in the silence, not nothing but everything, the luminous, aware, informationally rich ground of consciousness that the noise had been concealing and that the silence reveals. The neuroscientist Willoughby Britton at Brown University has studied the neurological effects of intensive silent meditation retreats and found specific measurable changes in brain function. Decreased default mode network activity, the reduction of the self-referential filtering, increased gamma coherence, the enhancement of the integrated, unified conscious experience, and altered connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, the restructuring of the relationship between the cognitive and the emotional processing. The silence produces specific, measurable, neurologically real changes in the brain, changes that are consistent with the antenna theory's prediction that the reduction of the noise enhances the reception of the signal. The Zen tradition takes the cultivation of silence to its most radical expression. The Zen session, the intensive meditation retreat, is conducted in near total silence for periods of 1 to 7 days. The practitioners sit in zazen, seated meditation, for up to 14 hours per day, facing a blank wall, with no instruction, no teaching, no verbal guidance of any kind. The silence is total, and the experience that the silence produces, the kensho, the satori, the sudden breakthrough into the perception of the nature of reality, is described by the Zen tradition as the most direct, the most complete, and the most transformative experience that the human consciousness can have. The Zen master Shunryu Suzuki described the relationship between silence and perception. When you listen to someone speaking, if your mind is quiet, you can hear the truth in the silence between the words. When you look at the world, if your mind is quiet, you can see the truth in the silence between the objects. And when you sit in meditation, if your mind is completely quiet, you can perceive the truth that is the silence itself, the silence that is not between anything but that is the ground of everything. The Zen tradition's relationship with silence extends beyond the meditation hall into the aesthetic dimension. The concept of ma, the Japanese aesthetic of negative space, the beauty of the empty, the eloquence of the unsaid, pervades Japanese art, architecture, and music. The silence between the notes is as important as the notes. The empty space in the painting is as meaningful as the brushstrokes, and the pause in the conversation is as communicative as the words. The Ma is the Zen tradition's recognition that the silence is not the absence of content. It is a form of content, a form that is more subtle, more profound, and more communicative than the noise that the silence contains. The composer John Cage's famous piece, 433, 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, is the Western music's most radical engagement with the Zen concept of Ma. Cage's piece instructs the performer to sit at the piano and play nothing for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. The music is the ambient sound that the audience hears during the silence, the coughs, the rustling, the breathing, the traffic outside. Cage's point is the Zen point. The silence is not empty. The silence is full of sounds that the music normally drowns out, full of perceptions that the activity normally conceals, and full of a reality that the noise normally masks. The cosmic silence may be like 433, a silence that is full of a content that the electromagnetic searching is drowning out and that the stilling of the search would reveal. In Christianity, the tradition of Hesychasm, the prayer of stillness, the cultivation of inner silence, provides the most developed Western framework for the perception of the divine through silence. The word hesychasm derives from the Greek hesychia, stillness, quiet, silence. The hesychast tradition, developed by the Desert Fathers in the 4th century and systematized by Gregory Palamas in the 14th century, is based on a specific claim. The divine presence is perceived not through speech, but through silence, not through the activity of the intellect, but through the stillness of the nous, and not through the noise of the ordinary consciousness, but through the quiet of the purified awareness. The Desert Father Arsenius received the divine instruction that has become the motto of the Hesychast tradition: flee, be silent, be still. These are the sources of a sinless life. The instruction is a technology for cosmic perception, a 3-step protocol for clearing the antenna. Flee the noise of the social world, reducing the filtering, be silent, cease the noise of the speech and the thought, and receiving the signal, be still. Rest in the silence that the fleeing and the silencing have produced, and perceive the divine presence that the silence reveals. The Hesychast practice of the Jesus prayer: Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, repeated continuously, silently, in synchronization with the breath, is a technology for the progressive silencing of the mind. The prayer begins as a spoken word, a noise, a vibration, a perturbation of the silence, but as the practice deepens, the prayer moves from the lips to the mind, mental repetition, from the mind to the heart, heartfelt repetition, and from the heart to the silence, the prayer praying itself, without the practitioner's conscious effort, in the silence of the purified consciousness. The progression is a progression from noise to silence, from the electromagnetic, the spoken word sound waves, to the non-electromagnetic, the heart's silent prayer, from the detectable to the undetectable, from the signal to the silence. The Russian contemplative text, The Way of a Pilgrim, describes the progression with the specificity of a first-person account. At first, the prayer was a burden. I had to force the words. Then the prayer became a comfort. The words came easily. Then the prayer became a silence. The words disappeared, and what remained was the prayer without words, the pure attention, the pure presence, the pure awareness of the divine that the words had been pointing toward, but that the words, being noise, could never contain. The anonymous author of The Cloud of Unknowing described the Hesychast practice with extraordinary precision. Beat upon this cloud of unknowing with the sharp dart of longing love, and do not give up whatever happens. The cloud is the silence, the formless, contentless, conceptually empty awareness that the contemplative practice produces. The dart is the attention, the sustained, focused, non-verbal intention that penetrates the silence and perceives what the silence contains. And what the silence contains, according to the cloud author, is God, the divine presence, the infinite intelligence, the cosmic ground that the noise of the ordinary mind conceals and that the silence of the contemplative practice reveals. The Quaker tradition's practice of silent worship, the gathered meeting in which the participants sit together in silence, waiting for the still, small voice to speak, is the most democratized form of the Hesychasm practice. The Quaker meeting does not require years of monastic training. It does not require theological expertise. It does not require any specific belief or any specific practice beyond the willingness to sit in silence and to listen. The silence is the practice. The listening is the method. And the still, small voice that the silence reveals, the voice that is not loud, not dramatic, not electromagnetic, and not detectable by any instrument, is the Quaker tradition's perception of the cosmic intelligence that the silence contains. The Quaker George Fox described his experience of the silent meeting with an image that connects the Quaker practice to the cosmic silence. I sat in the silence, and the silence opened, and in the opening, I perceived a vast, infinite, boundless presence, a presence that was not in the silence but that was the silence, not contained by the quiet but constituting the quiet, not revealed by the absence of noise but identical to the absence of noise. The silence was not the condition for perceiving the presence. The silence was the presence. Fox's description is structurally identical to the physics description of the quantum vacuum. The vacuum is not the condition for the existence of the quantum fields. The vacuum is the quantum fields, the ground state, the zero-point oscillation, the silent, symmetric, self-contained information that constitutes the deepest level of physical reality. The Quaker silence and the quantum vacuum silence are the same silence, perceived from different perspectives, the contemplative from within, the physicist from without, but describing the same reality. A silence that is not empty but full, not absent but present, and not the lack of something but the most fundamental form of everything. The Sufi tradition's practice of khalwa, the spiritual retreat into solitude and silence, provides another technology for the cultivation of cosmic silence. The Sufi retreatant withdraws from all social contact, all sensory stimulation, and all mental activity for periods of 40 days, the traditional duration of the prophetic retreats in the Islamic tradition. The khalwa is the Sufi dark retreat, the deliberate creation of the conditions of the great silence, producing the inner perception of the divine that the outer noise was concealing. The Sufi master Ibn Arabi described the khalwa's purpose. The silence is the mirror. The noise is the dust on the mirror. Clean the dust, and the mirror reflects the divine face. The face was always there. The mirror was always reflecting. But the dust, the noise, the activity, the electromagnetic broadcasting of the mind was preventing the reflection from being seen. The theologian Thomas Merton described the silence's content with the authority of decades of contemplative practice. In silence, God ceases to be an object and becomes an experience. In silence, the divine ceases to be a concept and becomes a presence. And in silence, the cosmic intelligence ceases to be a hypothesis and becomes a perception, as direct, as immediate, and as undeniable as the perception of light or sound. Merton's progression from object to experience, from concept to presence, from hypothesis to perception, is the progression from SETI to contemplation, from the search for the intelligence as a detectable object to the perception of the intelligence as a present reality. The progression does not require abandoning the search. It requires supplementing the search, adding the inward look to the outward look, adding the silence to the signal searching, and adding the contemplative perception to the electromagnetic detection. The physicist and Zen practitioner David Bohm described the complementarity between the scientific search and the contemplative perception. Science looks outward for the intelligence, using instruments that detect signals. Contemplation looks inward for the intelligence, using the silence that perceives presence. Both are necessary. The outward look detects the intelligence's expressions, the signals, the structures, the physical artifacts. The inward look perceives the intelligence's nature, the awareness, the knowing, the conscious ground. And the full understanding of the cosmic intelligence requires both, the expression and the nature, the signal and the silence, the outward and the inward. The convergence across the traditions is now complete. Every tradition cultivates silence as the primary condition for perceiving the deepest reality. Every tradition reports that the silence is not empty but full of a presence, an intelligence, a knowing that the noise conceals and that the silence reveals. Every tradition provides specific practices for achieving the silence. Mauna in Hinduism, noble silence in Buddhism, Hesychasm in Christianity. And every tradition reports that the perception of the silence's content is transformative, producing a shift in the understanding of reality, consciousness, and the relationship between the individual awareness and the cosmic ground that the silence reveals. The traditions also agree on a specific, consequential, scientifically relevant point. The capacity to perceive the silence's content is proportional to the depth of the silence achieved. The beginning meditator, who achieves a few minutes of relative quiet, perceives the silence as empty, as the mere absence of noise, the mere cessation of thought, the mere pause in the mental activity. The advanced practitioner, who achieves hours or days of sustained, deep, undisturbed silence, perceives the silence as full, as the presence of the intelligence, the awareness, the cosmic ground that the beginning practitioner's residual noise was still concealing. The depth of the perception is proportional to the depth of the silence. The shallow silence perceives the shallow content. The deep silence perceives the deep content. And the deepest silence, the Turiya of the Hindu tradition, the Nirodha Samapatti of the Buddhist tradition, the Hesychast's prayer of the heart, perceives the deepest content. The cosmic intelligence, the universal consciousness, the divine presence that the traditions unanimously describe, and that the physics, through its description of the quantum vacuum's informational silence, is beginning to formalize. The traditions agree, the cosmic silence is not absence, it is presence, the presence of the deepest intelligence, perceived through the deepest practice, in the deepest quiet that the human consciousness can achieve. In the final stage, we will bring everything together, the Fermi Paradox, the physics of silence, and the contemplative tradition's experiential testimony, and ask what the cosmic silence means for you, for a being who lives in the universe's brief, noisy, electromagnetically active interlude, who searches the sky for signals that may never come, and who carries, in the deepest dimension of consciousness, the capacity to perceive the intelligence that the silence contains, not through radio telescopes, but through the silence of the mind that every tradition has been cultivating since the first human being sat down, closed their eyes, and listened. We have now assembled the complete argument. The Fermi Paradox established the question: the universe should be teeming with detectable civilizations, but the universe is silent. The physics established that the silence may be structural. The quantum vacuum encodes its information silently. The second law drives every system towards silence. The information theory demonstrates that the most efficient communication is the quietest, and the holographic principle locates the deepest information on a non-spatial boundary that the spatial instruments cannot detect. And the contemplative traditions establish that the silence is not empty. Every tradition cultivates silence as the primary condition for perceiving the deepest reality, and every tradition reports that the silence is full of an intelligence, a presence, a knowing that the noise conceals and that the silence reveals. Now we must bring everything together and ask what the cosmic silence means for reality, for intelligence, for the search for extraterrestrial life, and for you. Let us begin with what the cosmic silence means for reality. The most fundamental implication of the investigation is that the universe may be structured in layers of silence. The first layer is the electromagnetic silence, the absence of detectable radio signals, laser pulses, and megastructure signatures that SETI searches for. The second layer is the thermodynamic silence, the entropic trajectory toward the heat death, the progressive quieting of the cosmic structures, the return of every signal to the thermal equilibrium of maximum entropy. The third layer is the informational silence, the quantum vacuum's silent encoding, the holographic boundaries' non-spatial information, the Planck scale geometry's compressed data that no macroscopic instrument can detect. And the fourth layer is the contemplative silence, the silence that the trained consciousness perceives when every layer of noise has been removed, the silence that the traditions describe as the ground of reality, the silence that is not the absence of something but the presence of everything. The four layers are not separate silences, they are aspects of a single silence, a silence that pervades reality at every level, from the electromagnetic, the absence of signals, through the thermodynamic, the trajectory toward equilibrium, through the informational, the vacuum's silent encoding, to the contemplative, the consciousness's perception of the ground. The silence is not a feature of the universe. The silence is the universe, the most fundamental, the most pervasive, and the most comprehensive quality of the reality that the physics describes and that the contemplative traditions perceive. The four layers describe a structure that is identical to the contemplative tradition's description of the layers of consciousness. The electromagnetic silence corresponds to the physical layer, the layer of the senses, the layer that the instruments detect. The thermodynamic silence corresponds to the causal layer, the layer of the fundamental processes that determine the physical layer's trajectory. The informational silence corresponds to the subtle layer, the layer of the encoded information that underlies the physical and the causal. And the contemplative silence corresponds to the transcendent layer, the layer of the pure awareness that perceives all other layers, and that is, in itself, perfectly, fundamentally, and irreducibly silent. The Hindu tradition's 5 kosha sheaths, the Buddhist tradition's 3 kayas bodies, and the Christian tradition's 3 levels of vision, corporeal, imaginative, intellectual, are all descriptions of the same layered structure, a structure in which each deeper layer is quieter than the one above it. Each deeper layer contains more information than the one above it, and the deepest layer is the most silent and the most informationally rich of all. The cosmic silence is not a single silence. It is a layered silence, a hierarchy of silences, each one deeper than the last, each one richer than the last, and each one accessible only through the specific practice that penetrates the specific layer. The physicist David Bohm described a closely related insight through his concept of the implicate order. The deepest level of reality is enfolded, hidden, silent, self-contained, and inaccessible to the instruments that operate on the explicate level. The implicate order does not broadcast. It does not emit signals. It does not produce detectable radiation. It exists in a state of perfect, complete, informationally rich silence, and the explicate order, with its noise, its signals, and its electromagnetic activity, is the temporary, superficial, thermodynamically improbable disturbance of the implicate order's fundamental silence, The physicist Roger Penrose has quantified this relationship through his entropy calculation. The current entropy of the observable universe is approximately 10 to the 104th, a large number, but an infinitesimally small fraction of the maximum entropy, which is approximately 10 to the 10 to the 123rd. The universe's current noisy state represents approximately 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 119th of the total state space. The remaining 99.999.9% of the state space is the silence, the high entropy, featureless, structureless, signalless equilibrium that constitutes the overwhelmingly typical state of the universe. The noise is the rounding error, the silence is the number, and the Fermi Paradox's expectation that the universe should be noisy is the expectation that the rounding error should be the whole number, that the infinitesimally small, thermodynamically improbable, temporarily existing disturbance should represent the universe's true nature. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein captured this with his final proposition in the Tractatus, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. The proposition is usually read as a statement about the limits of language, but in the context of the cosmic silence, it reads as a statement about the nature of the deepest reality. The deepest truth cannot be spoken, it cannot be broadcast, it cannot be transmitted through any medium that the speaking, the broadcasting, and the transmitting presuppose. The deepest truth is silent, not because it cannot be expressed, but because it is the silence itself, and the attempt to express it in noise is the attempt to capture the ocean in a cup. The silence is not the background against which the noise occurs. The silence is the foreground, the primary reality, the fundamental state, the ground from which the noise arises and to which the noise returns. The noise is the exception, the silence is the rule. And the Fermi Paradox's assumption that the universe should be noisy is the assumption that the exception should be the rule, that the temporary disturbance should be the permanent state, that the thermodynamically improbable should be the thermodynamically typical, and that the surface should be the depth. Now let us consider what the cosmic silence means for intelligence. The Fermi Paradox assumes that intelligence produces noise, that an intelligent civilization will broadcast signals, build megastructures, and produce detectable electromagnetic emissions that reveal its presence to the galaxy. The assumption is based on the human example. We broadcast, we build, we emit, and we assume that every intelligent civilization will do the same. But the assumption may be parochial, the projection of one civilization's brief, noisy, electromagnetically active phase onto every civilization in the galaxy. The human civilization has been electromagnetically active for approximately 130 years, since Marconi's first radio transmission in 1895. The galaxy is 10 billion years old. If the average civilization's electromagnetic phase lasts a few centuries before the civilization either destroys itself or transcends electromagnetic technology, then the electromagnetic phase is approximately 1/1,000,000th of 1% of the galaxy's age. The electromagnetically active civilizations are, on galactic timescales, a brief flash, a momentary burst of noise in the silence that constitutes the overwhelming majority of every civilization's existence. The astronomer Seth Shostak, the senior astronomer at the SETI Institute, has acknowledged this possibility. We have been searching for 130 years worth of technology in a galaxy that is 10 billion years old. Our electromagnetic phase may be a brief, primitive, early stage that every civilization passes through on its way to something else, something that we cannot yet imagine and that our instruments cannot yet detect. The absence of electromagnetic signals may not mean that the civilizations are absent. It may mean that the civilizations have graduated. The graduated civilizations would be silent, not because they have stopped communicating, but because they have moved to a communication medium that the electromagnetic instruments cannot detect. The physicist Enrico Fermi's question, "Where is everybody?" may have a simple answer. Everybody is here, communicating, thriving, and expanding. But in the quantum domain, in the holographic encoding, in the Planck scale computation that our electromagnetic instruments cannot access, the civilizations did not disappear. They evolved, and the evolution carried them from the electromagnetic to the quantum, from the noisy to the silent, from the detectable to the undetectable. The Kardashev scale, the classification of civilizations by their energy consumption. Type I uses the energy of a planet, Type 2 uses the energy of a star, Type 3 uses the energy of a galaxy, assumes that advancement means more energy, more broadcasting, and more electromagnetic activity. But the information theoretic analysis suggests the opposite. Advancement means less energy per bit, less broadcasting per communication, and less electromagnetic activity per unit of intelligence. The most advanced civilizations are not the noisiest, they are the quietest, the civilizations that have discovered the quantum channel, the holographic encoding, and the Planck scale computation that allow them to process information with maximum efficiency and minimum electromagnetic emission. The physicist Michio Kaku has proposed an extension of the Kardashev scale that includes a Type 4 civilization, a civilization that harnesses the energy of the universe itself, that manipulates the space-time structure, and that operates at the level of the fundamental physics rather than the level of the electromagnetic emissions. A Type 4 civilization would be completely undetectable by SETI, not because it is hiding, but because it operates at a level of the physics that the electromagnetic instruments cannot access. The Type 4 civilization is the silent civilization, the civilization that has achieved the highest level of intelligence and that expresses that intelligence not through noise but through silence, not through broadcasting but through being, not through electromagnetic emissions but through the modification of the space-time structure that constitutes the deepest level of physical reality. The physicist John Barrow has proposed an alternative classification that he calls the inner space scale, a scale that measures a civilization's advancement not by the energy it consumes, the Kardashev metric, but by the smallness of the structures it can manipulate. A Type I minus civilization manipulates molecules, nanotechnology. A Type 2 minus civilization manipulates atoms, nuclear technology. A Type 3 minus civilization manipulates nucleons, subnuclear technology. And a Type Omega minus civilization manipulates the Planck scale structure of space-time itself, the deepest, smallest, most fundamental level of physical reality. The Barrow scale implies that the most advanced civilizations are not the ones that consume the most energy and produce the most noise. They are the ones that manipulate the smallest structures and produce the least noise. The advancement is inward, not outward, toward the Planck scale, toward the quantum, toward the silence of the fundamental level. The most advanced civilization on the Barrow scale would be electromagnetically invisible, not because it lacks technology, but because its technology operates at a scale that the electromagnetic instruments cannot resolve, and in a domain that the macroscopic detectors cannot access. The Transcension hypothesis of John Smart, which we encountered in the first stage, is the Barrow scale applied to the Fermi Paradox. Advanced civilizations do not expand outward into the spatial universe. They compress inward toward the Planck scale, toward the smaller, the quieter, the more informationally dense, and the more fundamentally silent levels of reality. The outward expansion that the Fermi Paradox assumes is the primitive strategy. The inward compression is the advanced strategy, and the cosmic silence is the signature of civilizations that have chosen the advanced strategy the strategy of going deeper rather than going wider, the strategy of going quieter rather than going louder, the strategy of entering the silence rather than filling it with noise. The contemplative traditions describe the same progression. The beginning practitioner is noisy, speaking prayers, chanting mantras, performing rituals, expressing the spiritual practice through external, audible, detectable activity. The intermediate practitioner is quieter. The prayer moves from the lips to the mind. The chanting becomes internal. The rituals become meditative. And the advanced practitioner is silent. The prayer becomes wordless. The chanting becomes the perception of the cosmic vibration, and the ritual becomes the direct, non-mediated, silent perception of the divine presence. The progression from noise to silence is the progression from the beginning to the advanced, from the type I contemplative to the type IV contemplative, from the noisy seeker to the silent perceiver. The progression from noise to silence in the contemplative traditions is not merely a metaphor for the Kardashev-Barrow progression. It is a specific, practice-based, experientially verified demonstration of the principle that the Fermi Paradox's physics implies. Advancement is quieting. The meditator who progresses from the noisy, distracted, default mode-dominated ordinary consciousness to the silent, focused, gamma-coherent contemplative consciousness has made the same transition that the Barrow scale predicts for civilizations, the transition from the loud to the quiet, from the macroscopic to the Planck scale, from the detectable to the undetectable. The meditator is, in this framework, a microcosm of the civilizational transition. The individual consciousness moves from noise to silence over decades of practice. The civilization moves from noise to silence over millennia of technological development, and the pattern is the same. The more advanced, the more silent. The most advanced meditator is the most silent. The most advanced civilization is the most silent, and the cosmic silence is the signature of a galaxy populated by the most advanced civilizations and the most advanced consciousnesses, all of them silent, all of them operating at the deepest level, and all of them perceiving the cosmic intelligence through the silence, rather than searching for it through the noise. The implication for the Fermi paradox is profound. The absence of electromagnetic signals may not indicate the absence of intelligence. It may indicate the presence of the most advanced intelligence, intelligence that has progressed beyond the electromagnetic phase, beyond the broadcasting phase, beyond the noisy phase, and into the silent phase that constitutes the highest expression of cosmic intelligence. Now let us connect the cosmic silence to every investigation in this series. In our investigation of time, we established that the block universe contains all moments simultaneously. The cosmic silence is the block's temporal quality, the timelessness that the block possesses and that the consciousness perceives as the silence of the present moment when the noise of the temporal flow is stilled. In our investigation of the hidden layer, we established that the visible world conceals a deeper reality. The cosmic silence is the hidden layer's quality, the silence of the holographic boundary, the quietness of the informational encoding, the non-broadcasting nature of the deepest level of physical reality. In our investigation of the unchanging source, we established that something persists while everything decays. The cosmic silence is the persistence's quality, the silence that endures when every signal has faded, every structure has dissolved, and every electromagnetic emission has been absorbed by the entropic equilibrium. In our investigation of the biological antenna, we established that the brain may receive rather than produce consciousness. The cosmic silence is the signal's quality, the quality of the universal consciousness that the antenna receives, the quality that is perceived when the antenna's noise is reduced and the signal's true nature is revealed. Not noise, but silence. Not broadcasting, but presence. Not electromagnetic, but non-spatial. non-temporal, and fundamentally silent. In our investigation of the cosmic neural network, we established that the universe may be a mind. The cosmic silence is the mind's resting state, the ground state awareness of the cosmic mind, the consciousness that persists when the neural activity ceases, the awareness that underlies the computation and that constitutes the mind's deepest, most fundamental, and most silent quality. The cosmic mind does not broadcast its thoughts. The cosmic mind thinks in silence, processing, knowing, and being aware without producing the electromagnetic noise that the Fermi Paradox assumes the processing should produce. In our investigation of déjà vu, we established that consciousness accesses temporal information beyond the present. The cosmic silence is the temporal access's medium, the timeless, non-electromagnetic, non-spatial channel through which the temporal information reaches the consciousness. The temporal access does not occur through signals traveling through space-time. It occurs through the silence, through the non-local, non-temporal, non-spatial quantum correlations that the silence contains and that the stilled consciousness can perceive. In our investigation of the inseparable quark, we established that isolation is forbidden. The cosmic silence is the non-isolation's expression, the silence that connects every point to every other point, that pervades every location, and that constitutes the medium of the universal connectedness that the quark's confinement, the entanglement's non-locality, and the holographic principle's boundary encoding all describe. The silence is not the absence of connection. The silence is the connection, the medium through which every point of the universe is connected to every other point, silently, non-locally, and non-electromagnetically. In our investigation of vibration, we established that the universe is made of vibrations. The cosmic silence is the vibration's ground state, the zero-point oscillation, the minimum energy, the irreducible quantum of vibrational activity that persists when every specific vibration has ceased, and that constitutes, in its perfect symmetry and its perfect balance, the silence from which every specific sound arises. In our investigation of the great architect, we established that the constants are fine-tuned. The cosmic silence may be the fine-tuning's purpose, the specific calibration of the constants to produce a universe that is, at its deepest level, silent, that supports the emergence of consciousness through its silent ground, and that provides in its silence the condition for the consciousness's perception of the ground from which it arises. In our investigation of the expansion, we established that the universe is expanding into something beyond itself. The cosmic silence is the beyond's quality, the quality of the reality that the universe is expanding into, the quality that the beyond possesses and that the universe, as it expands, progressively enters. The expansion is not merely the stretching of space, it is the entry into the silence, the progressive approach of the noisy, structured, electromagnetically active cosmic interlude toward the silent, formless, electromagnetically inactive beyond that, constitutes the universe's ground and its destiny. In our investigation of reincarnation, we established that consciousness may manifest at multiple space-time coordinates. The cosmic silence is the consciousness's home, the silent ground from which the consciousness projects into the noisy, temporal, electromagnetically active locations of the block universe, and to which the consciousness returns when the projection dissolves. The silence is not the absence of the consciousness, it is the consciousness's natural state, the state from which the temporal manifestations arise and to which they return. In our investigation of information leakage, we established that dreams may contain fragments of other realities. The cosmic silence is the medium through which the information leaks, the silent, non-electromagnetic, non-spatial quantum channel through which the information from other branches, other moments, and other configurations of reality reaches the sleeping consciousness through the decoherence barrier that the waking noise maintains. Every investigation in this series has been, in a specific sense, an investigation of the silence of the timeless block, the silence of the hidden layer, the silence of the unchanging source, the silence of the antenna's signal, the silence of the vibration's ground state, and the silence of the fine-tuning's purpose. The cosmic silence is the thread that connects every investigation, the quality that pervades every level of the reality that this series has examined. Now we must state the objections. The first objection is that the reinterpretation of the silence as a feature rather than a bug is unfalsifiable. If the silence is interpreted as the absence of intelligence, then the detection of a signal would refute the interpretation. But if the silence is interpreted as the presence of the most advanced intelligence, then no observation can refute the interpretation, because any silence, regardless of its cause, can be attributed to the advanced intelligence's non-electromagnetic communication. The interpretation is consistent with every possible observation, and is therefore, by the standards of the scientific method, not a scientific hypothesis. The second objection is that the contemplative tradition's reports of perceiving intelligence in the silence are experiential and not independently verifiable. The reports may reflect genuine perceptions of a cosmic intelligence, or they may reflect the brain's internal processing of the silence, the neural system's pattern recognition algorithms detecting intelligence where none exists, the way the brain detects faces in clouds and agency in random events. The third objection is that the progression from electromagnetic to non-electromagnetic communication is speculative. No civilization has been observed to make this transition. The quantum communication technology is in its infancy, and the claim that advanced civilizations communicate through the quantum vacuum or the holographic boundary is a theoretical extrapolation, not an empirical finding. These objections are serious. The cosmic silence's interpretation remains open, and the question of whether the silence is absence or presence is a question that the current science cannot definitively answer. The physicist Paul Davies has offered a balanced assessment. The question of the cosmic silence is not a question that the science can answer definitively. The science can measure the silence. The science can calculate the probabilities. The science can evaluate the hypotheses. But the science cannot determine whether the silence is absence or presence, because the determination requires a form of perception that the scientific instruments do not provide. The contemplative traditions claim to provide this perception, and the question of whether the tradition's perception is valid is a question that the science must take seriously, not because the traditions are scientific, but because the question that the traditions address is a question that the science alone cannot answer. Davies's assessment is the appropriate epistemic position. The cosmic silence is a datum that admits multiple interpretations. The science provides the structural analysis. The traditions provide the experiential testimony, and the integration of the two, the measurement and the perception, the instrument and the consciousness, the outward look and the inward look, is the task that the question of the cosmic silence demands. So what does this mean for you? It means that the silence of the universe is not necessarily something to fear. The silence that the astronomers detect when they point their radio telescopes at the sky. The silence that the Fermi Paradox identifies as a problem, that the Great Filter interprets as a threat, and that the Dark Forest interprets as a warning, may not be the silence of a dangerous, empty, or hostile universe. It may be the silence of a universe that is, at its deepest level, constituted by a silence that is richer, more intelligent, and more alive than any signal that the electromagnetic instruments could ever detect. It means that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence may need to be supplemented by a search for extraterrestrial silence, a search that uses the instruments of consciousness rather than the instruments of electromagnetic detection, that looks inward rather than outward, and that perceives the intelligence that the silence contains rather than the signals that the noise produces. It means that you are already immersed in the cosmic intelligence. The intelligence is not in a distant galaxy, broadcasting signals across light years. The intelligence is here, in the silence that surrounds you right now, in the quiet between your thoughts, in the stillness beneath the noise of your mental activity. The cosmic intelligence is not far away. It is closer than your next breath, closer than your next thought, closer than the awareness with which you are reading these words. The intelligence is the silence in which the awareness operates. And the awareness, if it stills itself sufficiently, can perceive the intelligence directly, not through instruments, not through signals, and not through electromagnetic detection, but through the direct, unmediated, silent perception of the presence that the silence contains. The philosopher Martin Heidegger described the relationship between silence and being. Silence is the most authentic form of communication. In silence, being reveals itself. In noise, being is concealed. The cosmic silence is being revealing itself, the universe's fundamental nature expressing itself in the only language that the fundamental nature can use, the language of silence, the language of presence, the language that is not transmitted but embodied, not broadcast but lived, not detected but perceived. It means that the contemplative practices, the meditation, the prayer, the silence that every tradition cultivates, are not merely personal spiritual exercises. They are instruments of cosmic investigation, technologies for perceiving the intelligence that the cosmic silence contains, for accessing the information that the quantum vacuum encodes, and for receiving the signal that the biological antenna is designed to receive, the signal that is not a signal at all, but a silence, the deepest, the fullest, and the most intelligent silence that the universe can produce. And it means that the Fermi Paradox may not be a paradox at all. A paradox is a contradiction between two apparently true propositions. The Fermi Paradox is a contradiction between the statistical expectation, the universe should be noisy, and the observational fact, the universe is silent. But if the universe is fundamentally silent, if the silence is not the exception but the rule, not the absence but the presence, not the problem but the solution, then there is no contradiction. The expectation was wrong. The universe was never supposed to be noisy. The universe was always supposed to be silent, and the brief, noisy, electromagnetically active interlude in which we search for signals is the anomaly, the temporary, thermodynamically improbable, cosmically brief disturbance of the silence that constitutes the universe's natural, default, and overwhelmingly permanent state. The Fermi Paradox dissolves, not because the question has been answered, but because the question has been reframed. The question is not, where is everybody? The question is, why do we assume that everybody should be noisy? And the answer is, because we are noisy, because we broadcast, because we emit, because we are in the brief, primitive, electromagnetically active phase of our civilization's development, and we project our phase onto every civilization in the galaxy. The projection is the paradox. The silence is the reality. The physicist Freeman Dyson described his relationship with the cosmic silence with characteristic honesty. I have the feeling that the universe is full of something that I cannot detect, something that is intelligent, something that is aware, and something that is communicating, but not in any language that my instruments can translate. The communication is in the silence, and the silence is not empty. The silence is the language. Dyson's intuition that the universe is full of something intelligent, aware, and communicating, but in a language that his instruments cannot translate, is the intuition that every contemplative tradition has been developing into a systematic practice for millennia. The Hindu Nada yogi who perceives the cosmic vibration in the silence, the Buddhist meditator who perceives the luminous emptiness in the stillness, the Christian hesychast who perceives the divine presence in the quiet. Each one is translating the language that Dyson intuited but could not access through his instruments, the language of silence, the language of presence, the language that is not transmitted through signals but embodied in the stillness that underlies every signal. The astronomer Carl Sagan described humanity's position in the cosmos with words that acquire a new resonance in the light of the cosmic silence. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. If the cosmos's deepest nature is silence, then we are a way for the silence to know itself, a way for the cosmic quiet to develop the instruments, the biological antennas, the contemplative practices, the trained consciousnesses through which it can perceive its own nature, recognize its own intelligence, and understand its own silence. The universe is speaking to you right now. It is speaking in the language that it has always spoken, the language of silence, the language of presence, the language that is not transmitted through signals, but embodied in the stillness that underlies every sound, every structure, and every electromagnetic emission that the noisy phase of the universe's existence produces. The language is silence, the message is presence, and the receiver is not a radio telescope. The receiver is you, sitting in the silence, stilling the noise, and listening for the intelligence that the cosmic silence has been broadcasting in its own silent way since the beginning of time. The universe is not silent because it has nothing to say. The universe is silent because what it has to say can only be heard in the silence. Listen,